What would you do if you heard a child's trembling voice say the unthinkable, "I want to go to jail with my mom"? Friends, that was the moment that froze an entire courtroom. The room fell silent. Papers stopped rustling, even breaths seemed to halt, as every person turned their eyes toward the small boy standing beside his mother. His tiny hands clutched her arm tightly, his face pale, his lips quivering. It wasn't a joke. It wasn't confusion. It was a plea, pure, raw, and heartbreaking. Judge Frank Caprio, known for his compassion and wisdom, leaned forward slowly. His eyes, usually calm and steady, reflected the same shock everyone else felt. In his decades on the bench, he had heard countless excuses, pleas, and confessions. But never had he heard something so piercing, so devastating from a child so young. The question echoed in the minds of everyone watching. Why would a child ask to go to jail? What fear could drive him to imagine a world where the only safe place was behind bars with his mother? The audience shifted uncomfortably in their seats, some covering their mouths, others blinking back tears. The prosecutor, caught off guard, lowered his papers, unsure how to proceed. Even the court officers, hardened by years of routine, were visibly shaken. This was no longer just a case. This was a moment that exposed the human heart in its most fragile form. The boy's mother tried to steady him, her hand gently rubbing his back, but she could not hide her own tears. She had come expecting to face fines, possibly worse. But she had not expected her son to reveal his deepest fear aloud, the terror of losing her. Judge Caprio let the silence stretch. He knew the weight of this moment. Every word spoken next would matter. Every decision would ripple far beyond this courtroom. Millions would one day see this moment online, replaying it again and again, unable to forget the child's voice. Stay with me, because what Judge Caprio said next not only left this boy and his mother in tears, but it left the entire internet shaken. A decision that went far beyond law, straight into the heart of humanity. Judge Frank Caprio has long been a symbol of something rare in the justice system. A judge whose heart is just as powerful as his gavel. For decades, people have walked into his courtroom expecting stern discipline, but many walked out with something more. Understanding, empathy, and a reminder that justice isn't only about punishment, it's about people. His reputation grew because he listened, because he asked questions no other judge bothered to ask, and because his verdicts often reflected not just the law but humanity itself. On this day the courtroom was full, but the atmosphere was heavier than usual. The soft shuffle of papers, the hum of people waiting for their names to be called, all of it carried a tension just beneath the surface. The air was charged with curiosity but also with fear, because for some, this room would mean fines or worse. And yet there was also a quiet warmth. People knew that if anyone could see beyond numbers on a page, it was Judge Caprio. The wooden benches gleamed under the bright natural light streaming through the tall windows. The American flag stood proudly behind the judge's bench, its colors muted by time but still commanding presence. Every detail of the room reflected order, but what was about to unfold would shake that order in ways no one expected. Then she walked in. The mother. Her shoulders sagged beneath an invisible weight. Her clothes were neat but worn, her face pale with exhaustion. She looked like someone who had fought battles no one else could see. She was a single parent, and every step she took to that podium carried the struggle of holding her world together with fragile threads. She clutched a few papers in her hand, citations, notices, reminders of mistakes that had compounded into something larger than she could manage. Beside her was her son. Small, innocent, his hair slightly messy, his shoes worn down but carefully tied. His wide eyes darted around the courtroom, unsure of what it all meant, but sure of one thing. He wasn't going to let go of his mother's side. His hand gripped hers so tightly that his knuckles turned white. He wasn't there as a spectator. He was there because in his young heart, wherever she went, he belonged too. Judge Caprio looked down at them, his gaze softening immediately. It was clear this was not an ordinary case. He could sense it from the way the mother avoided eye contact, as though ashamed to stand where she stood. He could sense it from the boy's presence, a child who should have been in school or on a playground, not in a courtroom bracing for the word jail. The clerk read the charge aloud. Unpaid fines, penalties that had stacked up beyond the mother's reach. On paper it looked like negligence, like irresponsibility. But to anyone who saw her face, it was clear there was more, a story hidden behind tired eyes and trembling hands. The boy tugged at his mother's sleeve as the charges were read. His lips pressed together, as though he understood more than a child his age should. There was no confusion in his gaze, only fear. He had overheard enough conversations, seen enough bills stacked on the kitchen table, to know what was at stake. And though he couldn't grasp the full weight of the law, He understood the one thing that mattered most. He might lose his mother. The spectators in the courtroom exchanged glances. Some shook their heads, others sighed, already feeling the ache of sympathy. This wasn't a hardened criminal standing before Judge Caprio. This was a mother who had reached the breaking point. Friends, ask yourself, what mistake could be so great that it threatened to tear apart a family like this? What fear was hiding beneath that child's silence? A fear so strong it would soon make him speak words no one expected. Judge Caprio adjusted his glasses, folded his hands and looked at the mother. His voice was calm, but it carried the weight of decades of wisdom. "Ma'am," he said, "tell me your story." And with that invitation, the courtroom was no longer about fines or paperwork. It was about to become the stage for a truth so raw and so emotional that it would leave millions in tears long after this moment left the bench. The mother drew in a shaky breath. Her hands clutched the papers tighter, but it wasn't the citations that weighed her down, it was her own story. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet, threaded with exhaustion, but steady enough to carry across the room. "Your Honor," she began, eyes lowered, "I never meant to be standing here. I've tried my whole life to do the right thing. But sometimes, no matter how hard you try, life keeps pulling you under." Judge Caprio nodded gently, urging her to continue. "I'm raising my son on my own," she said, her voice breaking slightly as she glanced down at the boy standing beside her. "His father left years ago. I don't get child support. I don't have family nearby. It's just me and him." The boy's hand tightened around hers. She gave him a weak smile, then faced forward again. "I work 2 jobs. In the mornings, I clean offices before the businesses open. At night, I waitress at a diner. In between, I try to be a mother, helping him with school, making sure he eats, trying to keep some kind of normal life for him. But no matter what I do, there's never enough money." Her words painted a picture clearer than any document ever could. The audience shifted in their seats, sympathy washing over them. This wasn't a criminal trying to dodge responsibility. This was a woman doing everything she could just to survive. She swallowed hard, her eyes glistening. "Some weeks I have to decide, do I pay the gas bill or buy groceries? Do I pay for his school supplies or put gas in the car to get to work?" The fines, they just kept coming. Parking tickets, late fees, penalties. I tried to keep up at first, but then one piled on another, and before I knew it, I was drowning. Her son looked up at her, his face solemn. He had heard pieces of this story before, whispers at the kitchen table, late-night sighs, but now he was hearing the full weight of it. Each word seemed to carve itself into him. The mother continued, her voice trembling. "I'm not proud of being here. Every notice that came in the mail felt like a failure. I'd hide them in a drawer so my son wouldn't see. I told myself I'd figure it out. But I never could." She paused, her chest heaving with the effort of holding back tears. "And now they say I could go to jail. I don't care what happens to me, but—" She turned, glancing at her son, who stared back with wide, frightened eyes. "What will happen to him if I'm not there?" The question hung in the air, heavy and sharp. It wasn't just rhetorical. It was the cry of every struggling parent who fears their child will pay the price for their mistakes. The audience sat frozen. Some shook their heads, not in judgment but in disbelief at how much she had endured. Her words stripped away the distance between defendant and person. No one in that room saw a woman defined by fines anymore. They saw a mother on the edge, carrying the impossible weight of survival. Judge Caprio's expression softened, his brows furrowing with empathy. "Ma'am," he said gently, "it sounds like you've been carrying more than any one person should." Her lips trembled, but she nodded. "I've tried, Your Honor. I really have. But sometimes it feels like no matter how much I give, it's never enough. I go to work tired, I come home exhausted, and I look at him, and I just hope he doesn't see how scared I am." Her son finally looked away, his small shoulders shaking as he blinked back tears. For the first time he seemed to realize the full weight his mother had carried alone. Friends, imagine being in her shoes. Imagine trying to hold your world together with 2 hands while everything keeps breaking apart. How much can one person endure before breaking? How many sacrifices can a mother make before the law sees not negligence, but humanity? The mother lowered her head, her final words quiet but piercing. "I'm here because I ran out of strength. I couldn't keep up anymore. I'm not asking for pity, Your Honor. I just don't want to lose my son." The boy clung to her arm, his silence louder than any words he could speak. The entire courtroom waited, hearts heavy, for what would happen next. The prosecutor stood, papers in hand, his voice clear and practiced. He read from the file without looking up at first, as though it were just another routine case. "Your Honor, The defendant has accumulated multiple unpaid fines over the course of several months. Notices were sent, deadlines were missed. The total amount now owed is substantial, and given the repeated failure to comply, incarceration is a possible consequence. The word incarceration hit the room like a thunderclap. For the mother, it landed heavier than anything else said that morning. Her lips parted, her eyes darted toward her son instinctively. Jail. The very word she had feared would be spoken out loud now hung in the air, echoing in her mind, in her bones. She staggered slightly, her knees almost buckling, and grabbed the edge of the podium for support. Her son's eyes widened, confusion and panic washing over his young face. He looked at her, then at the judge, then at the prosecutor. His small chest heaved, his breath quickening. The prosecutor continued, but his voice faded against the silent roar of fear swelling inside the child's heart. Jail. Taken away. Alone. The boy suddenly tugged at his mother's sleeve. At first she tried to hush him, whispering, "It's okay, sweetheart, it's okay." But he shook his head, his little fists clenched, his voice trembling as he spoke loud enough for the entire courtroom to hear. "Can I go to jail with her?" The words pierced the room like glass shattering. Gasps rippled through the benches. A woman in the back raised her hand to her mouth, eyes welling with tears. Court officers exchanged uneasy glances. Even the prosecutor froze, his rehearsed speech collapsing into silence as he turned to stare at the boy. Judge Caprio leaned forward slowly, his face a mix of shock and sorrow. He had presided over countless cases, had heard pleas of desperation, anger, guilt, but never this. Never a child, his voice breaking, asking to be imprisoned simply because the thought of being separated from his mother was too much to bear. The mother bent down quickly, pulling her son close, her own tears spilling freely. "No, baby, no," she whispered frantically. "You don't have to say that." But the boy shook his head again, his little face crumpled with determination. "I don't want her to go alone," he said louder now, his voice cracking. "If she has to go, I'm going too." The courtroom sat in stunned silence, the words echoing against the wood-paneled walls. No one moved. No one spoke. The innocence of the child's request made it all the more devastating. He didn't understand the system, the laws, the punishments. All he knew was love. All he knew was loyalty. His mother clung to him, her sobs audible now, her body trembling as though she might collapse. She turned her tear-streaked face to Judge Caprio, silently begging for mercy, for understanding, for anything that could keep her from being torn away from her son. Friends, imagine sitting in that courtroom. Imagine hearing a child beg to share a cell, just to hold on to the one person who means everything to him. Would your heart not break? Would you not question whether the law, in its cold precision, could ever capture the weight of love and fear in that moment? The prosecutor slowly lowered his papers, his voice caught in his throat. The law was clear. The fines were real. But even he could not bring himself to speak after what he had just heard. The entire case had shifted in an instant, no longer about unpaid tickets, but about the unshakable bond between a mother and her child. Judge Caprio's eyes softened, though his jaw was set in thought. He leaned forward, hands clasped on the bench, and looked directly at the boy. The room held its breath. What would he say? What could he possibly say to a child who only wanted to share his mother's fate? The silence was unbearable, stretching across the courtroom like a taut wire ready to snap. All eyes were on the judge. And in that suspended moment, suspense filled every corner of the room. Because everyone knew, what happened next would not just be a ruling. It would be a revelation. The mother's sobs quieted into trembling breaths. She held her son close, one hand resting on his head as if she could shield him from the very world that had cornered them. When she lifted her gaze to Judge Caprio, her face was streaked with tears, her voice raw but steady enough to finally speak the truth she had buried for far too long. "Your Honor," she began, swallowing hard, "I need to tell you something I've never said out loud in this way before." Her son's wide eyes fixed on her, uncertain, but she pressed on. "My biggest fear isn't going to jail. It isn't paying fines I can't afford. My biggest fear is losing him. If I'm locked away, he doesn't just lose his mother for a few days or weeks. He loses the one person who tucks him in at night, who makes sure he eats, who keeps him safe. And I don't trust the system to do that for him." The courtroom shifted uncomfortably, her words hitting every parent in the room with a gut punch of recognition. She lowered her gaze, her voice breaking. "There were nights when we had nowhere to go. I parked my car behind a supermarket and told him we were having a camping adventure. He was so little then he believed me. I gave him my coat to use as a blanket and told him stories until he fell asleep. But the truth was, I sat awake all night terrified someone would knock on the window and take him from me. Gasps rippled softly through the spectators. The boy blinked at her, his mouth parting slightly. He had memories of those nights, but she had always made them seem like games. Now he understood. There were weeks, she continued, when I skipped meals so he could eat. I'd tell him I wasn't hungry or that I'd eaten earlier. But the truth was, I'd go to bed with an empty stomach so he wouldn't have to. He never complained, but I can see now that he knew more than I realized. Her son's lip quivered. He gripped the edge of her sleeve, tears finally spilling as he whispered, "I knew, Mom. I knew." The courtroom froze in that moment, innocence colliding with sacrifice, the kind of revelation that could silence even the most hardened heart. The mother's shoulders shook, but she pressed forward, needing the judge to hear her whole truth. "I thought I was protecting him by hiding everything, but he's been protecting me too." He saw through the smiles I forced. He heard the sighs I tried to hide. And when he asked to go to jail with me just now, she broke off, her voice trembling. "It showed me he's been carrying my burden all along, even though he's just a child." Her confession filled the room with a heavy silence, each word settling into the hearts of those listening. The prosecutor lowered his gaze to the desk, his once firm stance softened by the undeniable reality of her struggle. She placed a hand on the metal-like courage she carried within and faced Judge Caprio directly. "I've failed in many ways, Your Honor, but I never wanted to fail as a mother. Every fine, every mistake, it wasn't out of neglect. It was survival. It was me trying to make sure he never felt completely alone." Her son clung tighter, his small frame trembling against hers. The sight of the boy's tears, mixed with his mother's broken honesty, struck deeper than any legal argument ever could. Friends, imagine hearing these words, imagine seeing this child's heartbreak. Could you truly weigh them against the numbers on a page? Could you call her just another defendant, when what she revealed was a life defined by sacrifice, love, and quiet desperation? The courtroom sat stunned, shaken to its core. Because in that moment, everyone realized, this wasn't just about fines. This was about a mother's unbreakable bond and a child's fear of losing the only person who had ever been his world. The mother's voice trailed off into silence, her final words trembling in the air like fragile glass. For a moment, the courtroom was utterly still, every spectator frozen in the rawness of what they had just heard. Then, as if the silence itself broke him, the boy buried his face into his mother's side and began to cry. At first it was a soft whimper, but it grew quickly into uncontrollable sobs. His small hands clutched desperately at her clothes, his fingers digging in as though afraid she might be pulled away at any second. "Don't take her," he cried out, his words shaking with terror. "Please don't take my mom." The room shifted as waves of emotion rippled through it. A woman on the back bench pressed a hand to her mouth, tears streaming down her cheeks. A man who had come in with arms crossed now wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. Even the court officers, stoic by nature, turned their gazes downward, unwilling to reveal how moved they were. The mother bent low, wrapping her arms around her son, rocking him gently as though they were alone in the world. "It's okay, baby," she whispered, her own tears flowing freely now. "I'm here. I'm not leaving you." But her voice quivered with the fear she could not hide. "Please, Judge," the boy pleaded through sobs, lifting his tear-streaked face toward the bench. His voice cracked, fragile but piercing. "Don't send her away. I can't be without her. I need her." Friends, imagine being there. Imagine seeing a child so young, so innocent, reduced to begging for his mother as though love itself were on trial. Could you bear it? Could you watch without questioning whether the law, rigid and cold, was enough to meet the weight of this moment? The tension in the room was unbearable. The prosecutor, once firm in his arguments, now sat speechless, his papers untouched. The spectators leaned forward, as though their very souls were tied to what would come next. Every tear, every trembling breath of that boy filled the air with a question no one dared to speak aloud. Can the law truly separate them? Judge Caprio sat perfectly still, his hands folded, his face lined with the gravity of decades spent listening to pleas of every kind. But this was different. His eyes glistened as he looked at the boy clinging to his mother, a living embodiment of love unshaken by poverty, by fear, by the weight of punishment. The mother rocked her son tighter, whispering words of comfort she didn't believe. The boy shook his head against her chest, his cries echoing, each one sharper than the last. "I'll go with her. Please. If she has to go, take me too." Gasps broke again across the courtroom. The innocence of the words made them almost unbearable. He wasn't trying to defy the court, he wasn't rebelling. He was simply telling the truth of a child's heart, that love does not let go even when the law says it must. The audience held its collective breath, hearts racing. Every eye turned toward Judge Caprio. The boy's words hung in the air, demanding an answer. And as the mother's sobs filled the silence, it became clear. This was no longer about tickets, fines, or even punishment. This was about humanity itself, pressed into one impossible moment. The room waited, suspended in time, as all eyes turned to the man whose decision could either break or heal. Judge Caprio took a deep breath, his hands folded carefully in front of him. The boy's cries echoed in his ears, the mother's trembling frame etched into his vision. He knew that this moment would not be remembered for statutes or technicalities. It would be remembered for the humanity it demanded. He leaned forward, his voice calm but filled with gravity. "Young man," he said gently, addressing the child directly, "I want you to listen very carefully to me. No one, do you hear me? No one is going to take your mother away from you." The boy sniffled, lifting his tear-streaked face. His eyes widened as if clinging desperately to the judge's words. Caprio continued, his tone firm now, carrying the weight of reassurance. "She is not going to jail. That is not going to happen. I will not allow it. You can rest easy knowing your mother will be right where she belongs, beside you." The mother covered her mouth, a sob breaking free. Relief washed over her like a flood, her shoulders shaking as she bent to kiss her son's head. Judge Caprio paused, then turned his gaze toward the mother. "Ma'am, life has placed you in situations no one should have to bear alone. You've fought battles in silence, sacrificed without recognition, and carried more weight than most could endure. And still, your son stands here today not ashamed of you but begging the world to keep you close. That speaks volumes about the kind of mother you are." The spectators shifted, some openly crying, others nodding in agreement. "As for these fines," Caprio said, lifting the file, "the law requires accountability. But mercy too is part of justice. Considering your circumstances, I am reducing them drastically. And what remains, if anything, will not be enforced in a way that threatens your home or your child." Gasps rippled through the room. The prosecutor sat in silence, unable to challenge the decision, visibly moved by the compassion that had overtaken the proceeding. Judge Caprio closed the file softly and leaned back. Justice is not about punishment alone. It is about people. And today justice demands mercy. The room erupted in tears, not of despair but of hope. The boy clung to his mother, whispering, "We're okay, Mom." And for the first time in years she believed it. Sometimes the most powerful lessons aren't taught in classrooms or written in law books. Sometimes they come from the trembling voice of a child who simply refuses to let go of the person he loves most. That day in Judge Caprio's courtroom, we were reminded that justice isn't always about fines, tickets, or punishments. Sometimes true justice is about protecting the unbreakable bond between a mother and her child. Friends, think about it. What would you have done if you were in Judge Caprio's place? Would you have enforced the law as it was written, knowing it would break a family apart? Or would you have chosen compassion, understanding that no statute can measure the weight of a child's tears or a mother's sacrifices? The boy's words, "Can I go to jail with her?" still echo long after the courtroom fell silent. They weren't just words. They were a reminder that behind every case is a life, a story, and a love that deserves to be seen. Judge Caprio's decision didn't just free a mother from punishment. It restored hope to a child who had feared the world was about to take away everything he had. And this is why people around the world continue to share and replay these moments. Because deep down we all long to believe that compassion can triumph over cold rules, that mercy has a place in justice, and that love can be protected even within the walls of a courtroom. So, friends, tell us in the comments below, do you believe Judge Caprio made the right choice? Would you have ruled differently? Your voice matters because every time we discuss stories like this, we decide together what kind of world we want to live in. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to be reminded that kindness still exists. And if you believe more people should witness moments like this, give this video a like. Not for the numbers but to spread the message that mercy is never wasted. But remember, this was not the hardest choice Judge Caprio ever faced. Because soon after, another case arrived at his bench. One that forced him to confront an even deeper question. How far can mercy go before justice bends? That story is next.